So what we're going to take away from class today is tips and tools to help you price your cakes properly so you can build the cake business of your dreams. Action items you can take in your and actually put in your business today even that will deliver immediate results, and the belief that you deserve to be paid top dollar for your cake and dessert artistry. So those are my goals for the class to empower everybody with, because this is kind of everything that I'm sharing today is something that I would have loved to hear 8 years ago. It would have helped me a ton. It would have helped a lot of not even have as much heartache and issues, right? And I think that's something I've really kept in mind as I've gone through this, is like my 8 years ago self, what would have been of value at that point? And so we're kind of drawing on a lot of that. So we're gonna cover quite a lot of things today. First, we're gonna I won't go through each one of these, but you can kind of just jot through those. We're gonna kind of go through each one of these, talk through them. If you have brief questions, probably let's keep them to the end, but I may actually ask for questions on the way through, just in case, especially on some of the subjects that might have more questions than others. But feel free to jot them down. And then, like I said, I will send this PDF out, or not PDF, the PowerPoint out, so all of you will have it. So you don't have to feel like you have to write down everything that you see up here. This is kind of a little bit of a side note. I certified just a little while ago as a certified life coach with the Life Coach School, which I don't know if any of you know about that or know what that is, but it's very much focused on positive mindset and positive thoughts. And so I went through that certification, and I'm teaming that up with my business and marketing and cake knowledge to launch a consulting and coaching business in the coming months. And so really, really excited. So I wanted to kind of talk through this, because one of the principles they talk about in there is that business is math, and then we have our drama that we give it, right? Because really, if you think about it, they're calculations and formulas that businesses in all industries throughout the world use. Everybody uses profit loss. Everybody uses the same type formula. Some people charge more profit than others. Some people charge less. But it's all calculations that are just based on just math. But when we look at it, right, it's like, okay, first you say, okay, I'm going to charge this much for a cake. Then your mind comes in and says, if cake pricing is just math, then why is it so hard, right? And so then you come up with these different excuses. And I've made all these excuses in the past, right? It's like, I'm still learning, so I feel bad charging for my cakes. I just started my business. I'll charge more when I grow. It's just a hobby. I don't need to make any money right now. I'm scared to raise my prices. Will people even pay it? I feel bad charging more and making it hard on my customers. Sometimes that's hard, especially if there's economic things going on, right? I've only decorated cakes for a year or months. And so we make some of these excuses, but we can kind of tackle those as we go through this, because really, whether you've decorated cakes for months or years, yeah, your skill level is going to be different, and you're going to offer kind of some different products, but ultimately the formulas are the same. You should still be paying yourself for your time. You should still be covering all your costs that are involved, and you should be charging a profit so that you can actually grow your business. You can take that class that you want to take. You can buy the sheeter. You can buy the extra tools. You can buy the things that you want to actually grow your business and invest in your business and in yourself as well. So we'll go through some of that. So jumping right into it. So here's some kind of basic cake pricing formulas, right? You've got your ingredients, supplies, and overhead, and then you're adding your cost of time, your labor, which equals your cost of goods sold, which is your cost to make the cake, right? And then you're adding profit to that cost, which then is your retail price to the customer, okay? Trying to keep this as simple as possible. And we're going to break each of these little parts down so you can kind of see how I have calculated these. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is all based on my experience. There may be other ways to do some of these things, but after a lot of trial and error, this is what I have found works best for me and is very much in line with a lot of my friends that do cakes out of Utah as well. Quickly, I want to go over this. A lot of people charge per serving for a cake, and some people say, oh, you have to at least charge this much per serving, or you have to do this, or this is the per serving average price that you should charge for your cakes in Utah, or whatever it may be. You're more than welcome to do that, but my caution here is you first have to figure out all of this top part before you can actually figure out what your cost per serving is. You could just say, hey, my cost per serving is $5. But if you break down all the costs and all the nitty gritty, you may come out not making very much money. So really understanding what goes into each of these pieces is a huge part. But if it's easier for your customers to digest a per price or a per serving price, then you can do all this work and then figure out your per serving price, and then you can put that on your website if you want to. So going into ingredients and supplies and overhead, okay, there's a lot of things in here. So obviously ingredients is simple: flour, butter, sugar, vanilla, eggs, all your stuff, right? Your supplies is, this didn't update with my most recent one. Anyway, sorry. Cake boards, dowels, delivery box. This is like your food coloring, your cake paint, all of the things that it takes to make, even your fondant as well. You could put that in ingredients as well. It's all kind of part of the same thing. But if you're doing like a cake and then you're doing like an elephant on top or a little character, like whatever you're using, fondant or modeling chocolate, that's going to be part of your supplies that's going into actually decorating the cake. Cleaning supplies is one that most people may not think about, but on average, like how much do you spend on cleaning supplies every month? Soap or cleaner or whatever it may be. That break that down, and we'll kind of go through this in a minute. And then also equipment and utilities as well. Okay, I did this is pretty intense. So, and I should have highlighted some of these little parts in here. But one thing I want to say at the beginning, before anybody's like, whoa, this is crazy calculations, so many things going on here. So number one, what I want to point out, all these numbers right here, I got from Google, okay? I went into Google and said, hey, Google, how many ounces does 2 cups of all-purpose flour weigh? Boom, 4.41 ounces, okay? And then that brings me over here to my ounces of total ounces. And the reason I did ounces is because the stores that you guys shop at have done all the math for you and already tell you your per ounce price. It's like right on the price being when you go to the store. And all of my price per ounce things I got from the Walmart website. I just went to walmart.com and I didn't pick the highest end ingredients, I didn't pick the lowest, but I kind of picked kind of the middle ingredients, right? So then I picked that out and then figured out, okay, for my chocolate brownie cake recipe, it cost me $8.14 for my recipe, which makes 2 8-inch cake rounds, okay? Like I said, there's a lot of calculations, but think of it from a math perspective. We're not doing calculus. We're not doing anything crazy. It's like simple times, division, and those types of things. And you can get most of your information online. And honestly, I didn't have to think much about it. I just Googled a lot of this and said, how much does this weigh? How's the price per ounce? And then got my different costs there. And some of these I was a little bit surprised about when I first started breaking down my recipes. Like for instance, like cocoa powder, right? You get this is just the dark chocolate Hershey's cocoa powder that this is based on, but it's 40 cents per ounce. So for this recipe, I'm spending almost $3.50 for my cocoa powder, right? That's a pretty big cost, right? And then you have things like your butter, and then your vanilla. And this vanilla is based on, I can't remember the brand. I think it's Odell or Rodell or something. I can't remember the name. But it's kind of like a mid-grade brand. But even then, you're still paying, and that calculation is wrong, isn't it? I think it might be. I'll have to go through that. And then you go into a buttercream recipe. This is like an Italian buttercream recipe. I happen to have this one already broken down in ounces, how I make it. And so I just took my ounces, times it by the per ounce price, getting my buttercream recipe that's gonna frost that cake for me, okay? So then, going into my next step, so we've got our ingredients piece. Any questions on the ingredients thing? And there's a lot of little calculations in there, but you're good? Okay. See, this one updated with my list. So supplies, like I said, cake paint, fondant, supplies, modeling chocolate. I put $50 for this. I was going through each of them. If you're talking cake boards and cake drums, sometimes you're paying $5 or $6, especially if it's last minute, late night, and you're needing to buy something at Walmart or Michael's or stores that are overcharging or whatever it may be. So when you get, what I've found anyway is I do a lot of last minute stuff, especially in the beginning of my business. It's you're in the middle of your cake and you're like, oh no, I don't have this. Oh no, I don't have this. And it's just this constant thing. And then, so I put $50 for that. That could fluctuate depending on what you're using in your cake, but you'd be surprised if you're keeping track of everything you're spending on a cake, you're gonna want to wrap that into your price so that you're not taking any of that cost. Because the last thing you want to do is take some of your own personal funds or a salary from a job or savings or whatever it may be to have to make up for some of these costs, right? You don't have to do that. I've done that before. I've gotten in credit card trouble before with my business, and like you don't want to have to do those kind of things. And so this is kind of some things like that that can kind of help with some of that future heartache that you could get into. And then cleaning supplies, how I did that one is I kind of said, okay, I probably spend on average maybe $15. I'm basing this on probably when I did cakes from home a long time ago. But let's say like my monthly cost is $15 and I do maybe 15 cakes a month. And then you're gonna charge an extra $1 on your cake for cleaning supplies. So it's a kind of a rough calculation, but that's the best way to do it is like on average, I make 8 cakes a month and I spend this much on cleaning supplies. So that means that when I'm putting together my ingredients, supplies, and overhead cost, I'm going to wrap that into there so that I'm covering all my costs. And then when it gets down to equipment and utilities, I kind of guessed a little bit on this, but like when you get to, because right now, like for instance, my storefront, I spend $600 a month just on electric bill for my place. That's not including gas, internet's another $100. So like it gets up there. So, but if you're doing it from home, I know you're using that as like a home expense, but that's also a write-off for your business as well, and that's probably a whole completely other class.
You're no accountant.
And I'm not either. I don't either. But with this, like let's say your mixture of your electricity bill, your gas bill, your internet bill is about $300. And if you're doing 15 cakes a month, that's gonna break down to about $20 a month. The reason I included like mixers and oven in there, because every time you use your mixer, every time you use your oven, every time you use any of your tools, you're wearing them down and eventually it's gonna break, right? So you're gonna want to wrap in some of those costs into what you're charging, because that's just how business goes, right? It's like when you go to the store and you're paying for something, that's how everything's priced, right? Everything's priced there. They're covering every last little thing so that at the end of the day, they can walk away with money. So that brings my total to $87.08. For today's purposes, I rounded up to $100 just for some future calculations, just to keep it a little bit more simple and straightforward. Going into your cost of time, and there's a little bit of a discrepancy here, I noticed as I was going through this right before, is my recipe is for a much like smaller cake than probably takes 13 hours, so please keep that in mind. But I wanted to display and also challenge each one of you, the next time you do a cake, keep track of everything you do involved for that cake, right? Everything. Because even you driving to the store, the gas in your car, the time you're at the store, the time that you're planning and designing a cake, the time you're like answering emails, you're on the phone with customers, you're doing a tasting with the customer, all of those little things, that's all part of your time. Because like, I don't think any of us want to work for free, right? Like, and whether we have a big business or whether we have a small business or whether we want to open a business someday with our cakes, like we want to get paid, right? That's like, it's a fun hobby and it's great, but like, I think all of you are sitting in this room because you'd like to make money on something you love to do, right? And you want to know how you can do that. And that would be a challenge for each one of you, is to keep track of that. One thing to note on here I have for cooling, I said don't count unless you're actively working on something else. Because really, like, I don't know how everybody else does it. When I bake all my cakes, I bake them like the day or two before, and so I'm letting them cool, and then I'm putting them in the fridge or freezer, and then I'm touching them later, right? And so I'm not going to count cooling time unless you take them out of the oven and you put them on your cooling rack and you're still washing dishes and you're still doing other stuff, then you're obviously going to count some of that time in there as well. And that's when I put in here too, is clean up and washing dishes. Like, nobody likes doing that, right? Nobody. I mean, maybe somebody does, I don't know, but I don't think I've met anybody that really loves washing dishes, especially after you're done making a cake that took you 13 hours or even 8 hours. Like, you don't want to do dishes. That's the last thing you want to do. And then pictures and social media. Like, I put 45 minutes. That may seem like a lot, but honestly, like, from a promoting your business standpoint, like, I take all sorts of different angles of pictures. I take little videos, so I can do story videos, and then you're editing those, and then you're posting them. So there's a lot of time that goes in there. and you have to kind of keep track and see how long that on average usually takes you. And then delivery, I put this on here just as a frame of reference, as it is part of the cost, but I usually charge my delivery costs separately. And I have a separate slide on that in a little bit that breaks down how I figure out what I'm gonna charge for a delivery cost. But I usually don't put that in here just because there's separate calculations, and I kind of feel like it's a little bit more clean to be able to tell a customer, like, here's your quote for your cake, and here's the delivery cost. And then it keeps them separate. And I think customers appreciate that too, so that they know exactly how you're charging. And then if they have questions on either of them, you can kind of let them know, well, I got to cover my gas cost or whatever it may be. And then I'm trying to think any others in here that might be surprising. Not too many, but I think the biggest thing is next time you're doing a cake, like seriously, it takes a few extra minutes, and I think a lot of people, I didn't do this for years because I thought it would take too long, but just have a piece of paper or even on your phone and be like, hey Siri, write a note for me. That took me 2 hours. I don't know, whatever you want to do, but I think you'll be surprised at the end of the day, like how long it actually takes you. So I have a couple notes on my phone from cakes I did quite a few years ago, and they're like, one of them's like a 4-tier cake, other one's a 3-tier cake, and like I copiously like kept track of all the time, and they're really long. And like when it comes to like my Traeger cake that we did, I think it was probably like 60 or 70 hours total that we worked on it. So like had I not kept track of past cakes, when I get a cake like that, I may have like not made any money on it at all because I didn't understand how long it would take me. But that's one reason to kind of have that as a frame of reference. Be like, okay, the last time I made a 3-tier cake, it took me this long, but this time I have a 2-tier cake, but it has all these decorations on it. Then you at least have a frame of reference of where to start. And I would always err a little bit higher than you think, just to kind of make sure, because sometimes you do have disasters. I don't know about you, but sometimes you have a cake that sinks. Sometimes you have a cake that comes out and like you taste some of the cake scraps and you're like, oh, that's not actually very good. Maybe I forgot an ingredient or whatever it may be, right? Or you have cakes burn, cakes overflow. Like there's so many things that could go wrong. And so try to kind of keep in mind that some of those things might happen as well. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. So what is my time worth? This is a challenging question, right? Because that's like the first question that comes up is like, okay, you want me to charge for my time, but how am I supposed to charge for my time? Like, what is my time even worth? I don't know. And so for some frame of reference, like obviously Utah minimum wage, we're way down there in the minimum wage department, right? But I also put like In-N-Out cashier starting wage, $14 an hour. Walmart employee, most people are making $15 an hour, pretty much whatever you're doing there. Cake decorator, grocery store, on average about $13, $14 an hour, right? So looking at that, like in my opinion, I think you should be at least charging $15 an hour for your labor. But I really, in my opinion, you should be charging much more than that, because the type of work that we're doing is very specialty, right? We're not like, you go to the grocery store and compare it with what we're making, it's very different. You're not gonna get what we make at a grocery store. It's just not gonna happen. So you can't compare your prices to grocery stores, and you should pay yourself more than a grocery store decorator. And so that's somewhere to start. And so that gives you like a little bit of wiggle room, but also remember, like, if you're gonna be having a business doing this, like how much do you want to be paid? How much is worth your time? Like, and maybe $15, you look at that and you're like, I don't know, like I used to have a job and it paid 20 or whatever it may be. But that's gonna give you a little bit of a frame of reference on what that looks like. So if we were going off of 13.25 hours, you're almost $200 in labor at $15 an hour, and you're up your $265, $331, and then of course on up from there, depending on what you wanna do. But really, like, you're all in here are artists. Okay, like you're all either a cake or dessert artist. Like that's what we do. Like we make delicious treats and they look good and they taste good, right? Like you should be paid a premium for the types of things that we're doing. Now it's a hard thing, and we'll get to this in a minute because there's I'm sure there's all sorts of questions coming up. I can like see people's brains moving as I'm talking to you. But this as a frame of reference for this. So this is where, and honestly, like from a decorating standpoint, usually for like my bigger cakes that I do, I charge $30 an hour for labor. So I take all my costs, I charge $30 an hour for labor, I have my supplies, and then we'll get into profit here in a minute. Okay, this is one I want to spend some good time on. So that's why hopefully I didn't seem like I was racing through that too fast. But there are so many videos on YouTube about pricing for cakes. There's so many of them. And there are so many of them that never mention profit, ever, okay? So the number one question is, you're not a non-profit business. You're not a non-profit organization. Are you familiar with how non-profit organizations work, right? They cover all their costs, which includes labor and any cost involved with their business, but then they don't take profit, right? But that still means that you're getting paid, right? Everybody working for a nonprofit organization is still getting paid a wage or a salary. That's just how it works. But they're not making a profit. So why is profit important? It's because, and some people will say, oh, well, I'm charging $20 an hour. Like, I'll use some of that money to then reinvest in my business. You can choose to do that if you want to. I'm not telling you not to, but that's not, then you're taking away from what you're making as a wage. Because some of the reasons we're doing this is to make a little bit extra money. We might want it to be a full-time salary type thing that we're trying to build. It might just be like a supplemental income that we want a few extra $100 a month to be able to supplement what we have going on in our household. But if you want to at all grow your business, this is where profit comes in, right? Why it's essential is because how are you going to purchase equipment? How are you going to expand your operations? What if you want to hire an employee? Like, you're going to need a little bit of working capital to be able to kind of do some of these things. Upgrade your tools. Things break. And what if you want something new? You've decorated cakes for a couple years or a year, and you're sick of rolling out fondant, and you want to buy a fondant sheeter. They're quite expensive. I finally bought one for my shop, and they're like $4,000. But anyway, it's my baby, though. I love it. It's the greatest thing in the world. I love it. But if you want to buy things for your business to help you be a better business owner and have nicer tools and buy that airbrush that you've wanted, or buy that tool, or buy that fun new product that somebody launched that you really want to try, or a new set of molds or isomalt or whatever you want to do, right? This also comes down to, like, if you want to build a bakery someday, if you want to own a bakery someday, whether that's a brick and mortar location or renting a kitchen somewhere or remodeling your basement into a kitchen, right? It's like, if you want to build a bakery someday, where's that money going to come from? You don't want to have to borrow all that. Like, you may have to borrow some, but you don't want to have to go to the bank, which is also a hard thing to do as a small food business, because banks hate food businesses. And so I've had a lot of experiences there. A lot of turned down applications, like, sorry, you're a food business, we just can't touch you. But if you want to build something, this is how you do it. If you want to upgrade your website, Facebook paid ads. If you want to do like a boosted ad on Facebook, where's that money going to come from? Do you want it to come from your, like, what you're bringing home from your business? Do you want it to come from your, like, all your supplies and like everything that you spent? You don't want it to be taken away from other places in your business. Improve your skills through cake classes. So, like, for instance, classes like this or other classes that cost $500, right? That you want to go to and learn. Where's that money going to come from, right? I would love my business to pay for that kind of things and not have to take that from my personal savings or my spouse's, like, paycheck or whatever it may be, right? And then also the last one is save for a rainy day. And I also put pandemic/market crash, right? You never know what's going to happen, and you might want a little bit of a cushion, right? You might want that, because if you have a business, even if you have a business from home, you probably will have some recurring costs. Let's say you have your, like, internet bill that's $150 or $100 or whatever you pay for that, or maybe a phone bill, and all of a sudden you have a month that you have 0 sales, you have nothing going on, and you don't have any other money going on. But if you had profit mixed into your mix, then you can be slowly kind of putting some of that away as like a business savings almost, where if something happens, or let's say you need a fridge, right? You ran out of space. You need a new fridge. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from this. And you can also save the money that you're paying yourself as like a wage if you want to as well. Maybe you choose to make that kind of sacrifice where you're like, okay, for now, I'm going to do that so that I can then invest in that. The other part before we get into this other piece that I didn't cover when you hit labor or your cost of your time. So that's another piece that's important, because what happens to your like cake prices when you hire an employee, right? So then if you all of a sudden, let's say you have your 3-tier cake, let's say, and you're charging, let's say $600, and that's factored in to pay you $20 an hour. But then you want to hire an employee that's then going to decorate that cake for you. If you don't have profit in the mix, you're going to pay them the wage, and then you're going to walk away with $0 on that cake. You're not going to make anything. So that's another reason to charge profit as well, so that then it gives you that time to adjust a little bit. So then once you hire an employee, you can say, okay, now I can shift that labor cost to then help pay for Susie, who's now going to be my cake decorator and my baker. And then I now have my profit, which will then help me to hire other people or to help with some of the other business growth. When it comes to profit itself, so this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because it's like, and this is where some of the drama comes in. It's like, well, if I charge profit, I don't want to rip off my customer. I don't want to charge too much. What if they think it's too much? But I just wanted to kind of talk through this just a little bit. This was a little bit confusing seeing this, but I just wanted to kind of show a little bit of a comparison. Most food businesses are kind of in this category, okay? Most food businesses kind of, and maybe even more, kind of like 15 to 33%. You're not going to be getting up in here. Some businesses are, but usually on average, you're going to be kind of in this realm. And I'll kind of go through kind of what that looks like. So, like we talked about before, we have our ingredients and supplies. I rounded up to $100. I rounded up to $200, brings us to $300. And then for profit, so a profit markup. So if you're doing a 33% markup on this, it would be $100, and that would be a 25% profit margin. And then your retail price to your customer would be the $400, okay? And you can adjust this different. If you don't want to charge that much profit, you don't have to necessarily, but keep in mind, if you don't charge profit, your business is not going to grow. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. If you're not charging that, how is your business going to grow? It's not going to. And if you're going to be spending your valuable time in growing your business and working on cakes, you want to be able to pay yourself what you're worth, and then be able to have this money to be able to help your business. And then this is to show if we were going to go up to a 50% markup and a 33% margin, then you're going to be adding another $50 onto there, right? That's probably a little bit higher end. If you go super luxury, like in the luxury market, like even when it comes to cakes, sometimes people are charging 100% markup, which is double the price. And that can be done in some cities. I don't know if Utah's quite there yet. I don't charge that much profit on my cakes, just because I feel like that gets me a little bit too high, and then not many people are going to go. But if you have a niche enough product, then you sometimes can. So it kind of depends on kind of where you're at. But this is something also, if you're charging your profit too, this also gives you a little bit of flexibility here in a minute of what we're going to talk about, because we're going to also talk about a little bit of when it comes to discounts or family or friends or those kind of things. This gives you some opportunity to be able to actually shift around some of your money, so that even if you're doing a cake for a neighbor, you're still making money, as in you're paying yourself your costs and your labor for your time. You're not giving your time away for free, and maybe you just don't charge profit when you're doing cakes for family. Maybe that's just what you choose to do as your business, right? And keep in mind too, this is very much just numbers to look at. This is not necessarily what I would charge for an 8-inch cake, so just as a frame of reference, okay. But I just wanted to put this across of just so it's easy to understand, where it's okay. Well, and it's also interesting. So are any of you a part of like the Utah Cake group? Are you on there? Some of you are. I know oftentimes people will post on there and say, how much would you charge for this cake? How much would you charge for this cake? And you get money, you get amounts all over the board. And sometimes I see amounts on there and I'm like, okay, go for it. Good luck. Like, you're not making any money. You're paying yourself $5 an hour, or you're not paying yourself anything and you're not making any money. And yeah, it could be a learning opportunity and you really want to like try to do something to learn. But at the same time, it's also starting your business on kind of the lower end, and how are you then going to grow? When that customer comes back, they're going to expect those low prices, and they're going to come back every time and be like, oh, well, last time you did it for me for $100. Why is it like $300 now? I don't get it. What's going on? And so that's another reason to kind of understand your costs from the beginning, so that you can then, and even if you have customers that have questions, you can walk them through a little bit of this if you want, right? Like, I think honesty is the best policy ever, right? It's like, if I'm doing a cake and like, they may not realize that it takes so much time to do it, right? Because from a customer's perspective, like, oh, it's just flour, sugar, and butter and eggs, right? It's cheap, right? And looking at our ingredients, the actual cake part itself, it wasn't very much, right? It's like $20, right? For all your ingredients. But they don't understand that your cost of your time and all that goes in and all the personal investment that you put into your business, like, they don't understand all that piece that's there. And kind of back to the video that I showed, I guess, too. It's a little bit similar, right? It's like, they kind of maybe help them understand. Some customers won't understand at all, right? If there aren't people saying that you're too expensive, you're probably not priced right, right? Like, you should probably be getting some responses from people where like, oh, that's too expensive for me. Like, that's actually a good thing to be hearing that from people, right? If you're booking every single time and nobody's ever saying no, you might want to look at your prices just to double check of what you're actually making in your business. Okay, delivery. This is pretty simple. I found this site online that's genius, and you can go here and you can say, hey, I want to know the distance between Provo and Salt Lake, or Provo and Payson, or whatever it may be. And you can then say, okay, it's this distance, it's this time. I put in like our current gas cost, right? Because it's, a little bit higher right now. I think I paid like $4 a gallon the other day, right? It's ridiculous. So this, I have my cost of gas, my amount of travel time that I'm going to and from, because that's a cost too. Like, you want to charge for that. That's your time that you could be doing other stuff. You could be with your kids, your family, your friends, whatever it may be. Like, you should be charging that as part of what you're charging as a business. And so this brings you down to $37.40 to cover your, and this is if you're doing $20 per hour. So I have my cost of gas, cost of delivery time, and then I just tacked on a $5 wear and tear on your car. You don't have to do that, but if you think about it, your car is an asset, whether for your life or your business, and you probably want to cover some of that. And I know sometimes I've had cars that have been very unreliable, and so like driving it on a delivery is a little bit iffy sometimes, and so I want to charge money. What if something happens, right? So on minimum, a delivery to Salt Lake and back, minimum would be $58.40. That would cover your costs and your time. You can also do more than that. I usually charge $100 for Salt Lake and then like $125 for Park City. I'm in Provo. So you can decide what you want to do. You can even add a little bit of profit on there, like I was talking about before, because then that's when you get into kind of what other people are charging, right? And I think that's my next slide is like, okay, this is how much my minimum charge is, but let's see what everybody else is charging. And you can go on most people's websites and it will have what they charge for delivery for the most part, right? And so you can look and be like, oh, Cakes by so-and-so is doing this, Mighty Baker's doing this, or whatever it may be. And you can say, okay, so that means they're covering their cost and they're adding a little bit of profit onto it. And that's how they're covering their costs. And the other one on top of that is the setup, right? 30 minutes is very generous. Like I think it's more like an hour, like depending on where you're at, because you got to find a place to park. Sometimes you have to park like down the hill and find out where you're supposed to go. And then like it takes forever. Sometimes you have to drive on a dirt road or whatever it may be. And then once you get there, if you still have flowers to put on a cake or decor or like for a wedding, for instance, Then you're there with your wedding cake, all your flowers, and you're sitting there for an hour putting flowers and getting it all ready to go, and you've got the mother of the bride and the grandma and all the kids that are all there watching you do it and asking you questions, so it takes you longer, like all those kind of things that are going on. It's happened so many times where I'm like, my wife's like, are you done yet? I'm like, no, it took me like an hour to put the flowers on because this little kid had so many questions for him. I'm not gonna ignore him, right? So there's kind of things happen as well. So that 30 minutes might turn into an hour. You don't know that before you go. So maybe you fix that in a little bit and say, on average, I spend 45 minutes at a delivery, and then just know in your mind, if you're there past 45 minutes, like you're not making any money, right? And then you're like, okay, once I hit 45 minutes, like I better start getting out of here because I'm not really paid to stay to do that. Also too, if you're invited to stay and like cut the wedding cake, let's say, that's a completely separate thing. And that doesn't happen very often, because my number one suggestion for that would be, like when you're doing wedding cake tastings and those kind of things, always get the caterer's contact information and make sure you ask and say, hey, who's catering the wedding? Can I get their contact information? I just want to make sure that they're able to cut the cake. Even I usually provide like a cake cutting guide as well and say, hey, when I drop off the cake and say, hey, caterer, here is my cake cutting guide. This is how many slices you should be able to get out of it. And most catering companies, they've worked in catering long enough that they've sliced a wedding cake and they can figure it out too. But I usually give that just like as an extra piece. Also to cover myself too, because my cake's supposed to feed 80 people, but let's say I don't give a cutting guide and then they only feed 60 people. And then the customer's like, it only fed 60, what's going on? So that's something else. And there's cutting guides you can find on Google. I could even send you guys a couple links in the email when I send you the PowerPoint, because there's a couple online that are very simple, very straightforward, that are great assets. Also, to be able to know when you're quoting a cake, if you're trying to do a cake for 80 people, like you can figure out how many tiers you actually need or how big of a cake that you need for that. So this one, kind of a tough one, but competitively pricing your cakes in the market. This is a tough one. It's kind of what I referred to in the beginning, right? It's like you should be priced too expensive for some people, kind of to that point I mentioned. And the other one, this is a really tough one. And I've done this, I think everybody's done this, is try not to undercut other local bakers. I did that in the beginning because I wanted business, right? But then I realized, I was like, oh wait, but then I'm not paying myself enough money. I'm not making enough. And one point I wanted to make, what I said in the beginning, is like, yeah, we're all businesses, we're technically competition, but really there's enough market to go around. There's enough customers to go around. There's enough people that want cakes. There could be triple the amount of people in here, or even double the amount of businesses in Utah making cakes, and there'd be still enough market to be able to share. Like there's plenty out there. And just realize that we're all artists and we're all here trying to do the same thing. One thing I've joked around with my wife about before, and maybe it's a possibility, but I was like, we need to start like a cake decorators union in Utah, or a group that it's like, okay, everybody, 3-tier wedding cake, buttercream. This is the base price that we all charge, and this is just what we charge, right? And then rather than a price decision, it's more of like, oh, I like Brett's style. I like so-and-so style, or I like, and then it's less of a price decision. And yeah, price does play into it. But like I said in the very beginning, I think if we were all unified, we'd all make more money, right? And that's a huge animal, right? I don't know how to even close to tackle that kind of thing, because I try to like push little things in here, and that's one reason I like to do things like this, is because I think not only in Utah, but this is a problem outside of Utah as well. I have a friend in San Diego that does cakes down there. It's exactly the same issue down there. Same thing. You have people that are charging all sorts of different prices, and she's hurting for business because so many people are doing it for so much less, and it hurts the market overall, right? So that's another reason to kind of understand where your costs are and things like that. Okay, this is one that I like to go over, because in the beginning I struggled with this one so bad. I'm like, okay, how do I do this one? How do I do this? Like, if I have my neighbor or my friend or my aunt or my grandma or whatever, how do I do this? So this is one. So first of all, we're going to start at the bottom. Choose one and stick with it. and be consistent from the beginning. Just choose one. Don't think, like, try to get all the drama out of your mind, and just choose one and be like, okay, when somebody comes with me to family, I'm going to give them 30% off, or I'm going to charge full price, or whatever it may be. Because I know some cakers that do cakes and desserts, they don't give discounts ever, even to family members. They're like, sorry, can't do it. Like, that's just what they charge. But you have a lot of different options, right? You can do a specified discount. You could charge to cover your ingredients and supplies. You could charge to cover your ingredients, supplies, labor, and then just charge no profit, right? It just kind of depends on what you want to sacrifice to be able to do that cake for somebody. But then keep in mind, if you do a specified discount, you also need to make sure that those people that get the specified discount aren't going to then go to their neighbors and say, hey, I just ordered this amazing cake and it was only $200 and it was incredible. You got to contact so-and-so. You don't want that to happen, because then they come to you and you're getting these people that just want discounted cakes all the time, right? So you kind of have to make sure that those people that you are discounting understand that this is your policy and they're not to share that with other people of what the costs are. And maybe it's a specified discount of, let's say, 30% off. And what you direct them and say, hey, if somebody asks you where you got the cake, you got it from me and it was $500, right? And or whatever, or go to their website, see what their costs are, right? Because that's something in the beginning. I remember I had to tackle this quite a few times in the beginning of my business, where I did a cake for somebody down the road from my house in 2013, and then I had like my whole neighborhood come to me wanting the same thing. And I was looking at some of my rough costs, and I did not go in such detail back then, but even back then I realized that I was not making any money because it was taking me so long to do everything. So choose one and stick with it, and then be consistent. And then of course you can change down the line if you want to. Maybe for a time while you're growing your business, you choose to not charge profit, and then maybe later you're like, I really can't do that anymore because I have so much business coming in. It's all going to depend on the demand on what's coming in for your business, right? Be open and honest about what you are charging with your customers, because really, I think most people, it might take some conversation with people, but I think most people, if explained to them, they'd be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? If they were to really see the numbers and be like, oh, it costs you that much and it takes you 12 hours and okay, that makes sense, right? And even you may not share all these details with them, but you're charging you're paying yourself $15 an hour. You're like, oh, I make that at Walmart. You should make more than that. You're making cakes. You're doing way cooler stuff than I do. I'm like just folding clothes or whatever it may be, right? And so that's another thing too, is it depends on your customer, and you don't always, sometimes it's easier just to say, this is my price, and if they say it's too expensive, you say, see you later, and they'll go find something else, right? And really, do you, like Brett mentioned earlier, do you want that as a customer? That might be a trouble customer. I've had trouble customers before, and where I have bent over backwards because I've had a situation similar to the video that we watched, where I'm like a little bit desperate for business, and I'm like, but I really want to have this cake, so okay, I'll throw the delivery in for free or whatever it may be, and I'll do that. And then at the end of the day, I'll be like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, because then I deliver the cake and then there's more drama and then they have complaints or whatever it may be, right? And so I think pricing properly is a tough thing, but if you price it a little on the higher end, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache in the end. Because you're going to be able to cover all your costs and respect who you are and respect that you're an artist and that you're doing something that's really cool and that not everybody can do. People see some of the stuff that we create and they're like, I could never do that. So you need to charge a premium for that. They can't make it, right? They're not going to get it. They go to the grocery store. They can if they want, but they're not going to get what they're looking for, right? And you've seen all the cake fails online, right? That you've seen, right? It's okay, those are the ones that you're paying $100 for versus $500, right? Sometimes you may not pay as much, but you get what you pay for sometimes, unfortunately. So, okay, This is another one before we get into some like question and answer in just a few minutes is sponsorships. So with your smaller business, you may have not faced too many of these yet, but when it gets to like collaborations and exposure type offers, I'll kind of go into a couple experiences that I have here. So number one, sponsorship. So let's say your local high school or a local organization is doing like, let's say a raffle of some sorts, right? Or they want a cake, but they're a nonprofit organization or whatever it may be, and they want you to sponsor something. I don't know about you, but I don't have a ton of extra cash that I want to pay for a sponsorship because most of the time, the sponsorships are not going to get me business. Like there just aren't. It's a good PR thing, so public relations. It's a good like feel good thing for my business, which is important to do because you want to have a good level of PR type activity, right? But with that said, do I have enough money to just like donate $500 for a sponsorship? Not really, I don't. And so what I have done as a strategy is I said, okay, like I'm interested in sponsoring, but in order to highlight and show actually what I actually do for a business, like can I, like for instance, if it's a raffle, I've donated like a small cake or like a small cake for like an auction of some sorts and then donated that instead of handing them actually cash. Or in relation to like my business I have currently, I've had people contact me like from like the football team, let's say from a high school. And instead of me paying them cash, I'm like, okay, instead of that, how about your whole football team comes to my studio and comes and decorates cakes together and have a fun little competition. How about that? Because then what does that do, right? Then it's like I then gave them an amazing experience that they're going to go then talk about, which is a good advertising and marketing. So you kind of have to analyze over it a little bit to see, is this a value? And maybe it's just, sorry, my business is too small right now and I don't have the money to sponsor right now. I'm sorry. But there's a lot of like touch and go there. If you get any of these requests and you're curious, if you have any questions or if you want me to look at it, seriously email me. Like I'd love to look at them because there's some interesting opportunities out there, but sometimes they're just not worth doing sometimes. Collaborations and exposure. This is also a tough one. So my number one rule on this one for me is, are they mutually beneficial? So are they going to help me? Like if I'm making, and this also goes for like photo shoots, right? For like in a magazine or something. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, can you make a 3-tier wedding cake in this style? It's going to be a part of this photo shoot. We're going to submit it to all these magazines. It may be featured. It's going to give you great exposure. It's going to be amazing. I've done so many of these things and I have not gotten $1 of business back from that, right? It's a fun thing. It's a great feel-good thing to say that you've been in a magazine, but does that give you actual business back? It doesn't. Like, and a good example, so I did a cake for Salt Lake Magazine, and it was a 2-tier cake, and it was like a little, I wish I would have brought a picture of it, but it has like a panorama of like the city, 3D buildings, and we did that for the cover of their magazine, and I did that for trade for a $4,000 one-page ad in the magazine, okay? And that's what they charge for like a full page right in the middle of the magazine, $4,000 for an ad. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And I did it, and it was great, and I loved doing it. It was one of my favorite cakes I've done in that period, but I didn't get any business from it. Over the next 2 years, I asked every single bride, every single customer, like specific questions. How did you find out about me? How did you learn about my business? None of them said that magazine, right? Not even one. So am I glad I didn't pay $4,000 for the ad? Definitely, right? That's maybe a separate thing. But then also, like I put up here, choose wisely or just not at all. Likely, there's only like top 10% of opportunities that are actually going to be good for your business. And you don't have to feel bad about saying no. Sometimes it's like that fear of missing out, right? That comes in and like, oh, what if I do it? And then what if I get all this business? And so I'm not telling you no, don't take opportunities, but just look at all the details of it and just know what decision you're making, right? And know that on one hand, yes, you could definitely get business. And there has been some things I have done that have given me some good return, but it's a huge risk, right? It's very big. And another piece I'll put on here is somebody was years ago, and I have to share this experience because it was a hard one. I had this lady contact me and said, hey, I want this cake, and it's for this photo shoot that I'm doing. It's for a little kid's birthday, and it's for like a 2-year-old cake, and we have all these different vendors part of it and everything, and it should give you great exposure. I have all these followers and everything. It didn't yield any results from me, but then it ended up being the lady's kid's birthday party, right? So that was really like kind of a hit. I was just like, okay, I wish you would have told that to me in the beginning. It would have been like, no, sorry, I'm not interested. And maybe I got a couple followers off Instagram from that, but I look back at that, and that was a hard one for me. This thought just came to mind as you were talking. Maybe it's a discount code of some sorts, right? Yeah, maybe it's like a promo code where it's like, hey, you share this, and it's a specific code that only her followers can use. That's like send an email. Then you can actually track to know how many people actually came, and then you can use that as a judge for future times too, right? So I think this is my second to last slide. So just as a review. I hope that wasn't too much information. I kind of coming into this was thinking this is way too much information to go into. That's why I'm sending out the PowerPoint. I'll send this video out so you can listen to this. But I really wanted to kind of give a helicopter view of this is kind of overview picture of kind of how to look at pricing. So I hope we've been able to cover this so that you really can have some actionable items that you can start working on in your business. You can start tracking your time. You can start keeping your receipts. You can start really looking at this. So next time you do your cakes, make sure you do that. And then also too, I hope that as we've talked, I know that as we talk about these things, our minds automatically come up with excuses, and we're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm not ready for that yet. No, I'm not ready for that yet. So be aware of those thoughts that come up, and maybe you just have to recognize that they're there and be like, okay, yeah, this is really uncomfortable to charge this price, but I'm gonna do it because it's right for my business, and I respect who I am, that I'm a cake decorator, I'm an artist, and I deserve to pay what I'm worth. I am not worth $10 an hour. I'm not worth $5 an hour. I'm worth $20 an hour, and that's because I am a cake artist. I make delicious treats that look amazing, and really people respect that. If you can help them understand, I am a professional. This is a business I'm trying to build because I love it. And I think in general, not everybody, but I think in general, people respect that, and the customers that you want to pay for your cakes respect that in that from that perspective. And then last, I think I'm right on time. I wanted to give the last 15 minutes for some question and answer. So let's just jump right in. So
with the math formula that you're having for an example for 450, how does that translate if you want to do it to a person per slice? How would you say that?
How would I do it per slice?
Yeah.
So what I would do, let's say we did this. Let's say we did the $400. Let's say that's a 2-tier cake, and let's say it feeds 60 people. So I would take your $400, divide it by 60, and then you'd get your per slice price. Does that answer your question? So once you have all these calculations figured out, and the customer's like, oh, well, how much is that per slice? And then you can do that calculation and be like, okay, it's $7, or it's $8, or it's $4. If I do my calculations on my bigger cakes, I'm more in the $10 to $15 a slice type range when I'm doing the ones that take me longer to do because it's covering my labor and all my costs involved.
Because I did do research what the average slice in Utah was, and
yeah,
from $3.95 to $5 something.
Yeah, it's very low. It's very, very low. And some of those calculations, I wish some of those sites didn't exist, actually, because I don't know where they pull their data from. Because I think a lot of their data is probably based on grocery stores and
grocery stores charge you a lot for really crappy stuff.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's very, very true. Oh yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
With the delivery, I've had a couple people if I say, okay, this is how much the cake is and this is how much delivery is, and they're like, oh, no, I'll just pick it up myself. I'm like, well, it's a 4-tier cake, you can't just put it in your car.
So I have a policy on my, actually I don't know if I have it on my website anymore, because I'm not pushing wedding cakes as much anymore. I'm really pushing a lot of my custom cakes. But on my wedding cakes, I used to have this in a contract on something I sent to people. But anyway, let me try and remember what I put on there. But basically how I went about that is I said, if you want to come pick it up, you are more than welcome. But it comes with, and this is something the customer has to sign, right? Like a contract. If you take it in your car, I am no longer responsible for it the second it gets into your car. I am no longer responsible. So if it falls, it is their fault. Because that's partially what they're paying for, right? If you're delivering a 4-tier cake, they are paying for you to get it there safely. And that's another reason why to charge like $100 or more for that, because it's going to take you long. You're taking that into consideration. So I would make sure having a contract in place where you can say, like, if you do take it, you can. And I would even do that with a smaller cake too. Even just like a 10-inch cake with like a little decoration on the top, I would even have that. If somebody picks it up, just have that somewhere on a receipt or in an email or in a contract that says, once it leaves here, then it's out of my hands, right? And that's the same, I guess, when you deliver it at a wedding too. It's like once I have it set up there at the wedding and it has flowers on it and I take my hands off and I walk away, get in my car and leave, if some kid comes over and bumps the table and it falls over, it's not my fault, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So for that, do you do it at the point of like, you've given the quote, you're negotiating, and at that point you haven't signed it? Because you always go to the venue and they pick the table that's this tall and it wobbles and then you're like, it's wobbly, and they go get the racks from the kitchen to even it out.
Yeah.
And then you get your stand and your cake and you're like, holy crap, I'm taking a picture of this before I leave because it was standing.
Yes, I've had some big time drama there. Like, luckily no cakes that have like full on fallen, but some that I've walked away from that I'm like, that's scary. Like, it was really scary.
You can always send them to like a cake care instructions and say, give this to your venue, give this to your wedding planner, like how to set it up and what the specifications.
That's true too.
I include that in my cake contract. Like when I talk about like, when I walk away, you're responsible. Therefore, I have like a cake care thing that like I leave behind, but in the contract that they sign before they're fully booked, I say like, so these are things you want to watch for as you're planning, as you're like talking to your venue ahead of time. This is what to watch for.
Totally.
I still walk away terrified.
Yeah, I know.
I walk away terrified knowing I'm fully covered because we've been talking about it for a long time.
So then would it be judicious to have, like, once you deliver your cake, to have someone sign off that it's been delivered, set up, and everything?
I guess you could. I mean, what I normally do before I leave any wedding cake or like custom cake of any sorts, in most weddings the bride's not available, right? But I try to find somebody in the family that, whether it's the mother of the bride or a sister or somebody, or even the wedding planner, or whoever's like a head, or even somebody that like manages the venue as well, right? And making sure that you say, okay, I just want to, like, before I leave, and because I honestly from like a wedding cake standpoint, I will bring them over to make sure they're happy with it too. And then at that point, I then use that as my next kind of thing. It's like, okay, are you happy with it? This is the picture that we kind of agreed on. Here is how I decorated. Are you happy with it? Great. And then at that point, it's like a confirmation of everything's good. I'm out. So, and you could take a picture, which is really smart. I think, did you mention that? I think that's really smart to take a picture, because then and especially if by chance you can't find somebody there at the venue that can like check it off, maybe you take a picture just in case, right? And then you have a timestamp on your picture that says, I delivered it. It was fully set up at 6:15 p.m. This is what it looked like. You have your timestamp right on your phone that you can send a screenshot, and you have confirmation and proof that it was there and it was all set up.
So basically for the delivery, it could be called delivery and assembly. Especially if you take them to the venue, you have to put flowers.
Yeah.
It's like, if somebody comes and says, no, I'll take it myself, and you stack it all the flowers, it's on them completely. Right?
Yeah, and that's another thing too. I try to talk to people through. If I'm doing a bigger cake, I will tell them, like, yeah, you could pick it up, but keep in mind that like you have to keep it flat in your car. You got to keep your car cool. You got to do all this. And I think once you start going down a list of things to watch out for, I think people get scared, and then they realize that they should pay you for delivery. Right? And that's true too. And any of my deliveries, I bring like a little toolkit with little bit of like whatever I need to, right? A little bit of fondant, a little bit of buttercream, and just anything that I think that I'm going to need to have to touch things up. So, yeah.
So like I understand the getting to the final price. When someone messages you and is like, hey, what's like your estimate for a 2-tier cake, and you haven't talked about it, and then you give them an estimate, and then they're like, okay, I want this, and it's going to take you another 10 hours.
Yeah.
To do.
Yeah. Totally.
How do you give them a price estimate without the full price?
So what I do, well, this is currently how I have my pricing on my website. Is I have a minimum price on my website for custom cakes. So for instance, this is how I have it right now, is I have custom cakes on my website, and it says my pricing starts at $500 and then goes up from there depending on all the things, right? Design, decoration, servings, like all those little things. So I just put on my website a starting price for things, but that's the same way I would deal with like a quote like that, is I would say, this is where my starting price is for a 2-tier cake. And then it's gonna go up from there, but I can't give you a final price until I know exactly what you want on your cake and all those kind of things, right?
Do you typically start at like a naked cake or like a fully buttercream cake?
Oh, like for like a base price?
Yeah.
That's a good question. If you don't do fondant at all, I would probably just do like a buttercream cake, right? And maybe you have, this is my buttercream cake and this is my fondant cake. And also too, from like a naked cake perspective, I would not charge less for a naked cake than for a buttercream cake. Never, right? Even if it's less buttercream, because people will say that like, oh, it's less buttercream. But yeah, but with that said though, like with a naked cake, you still have to make it look pristine and nice looking. And that actually takes a lot of effort, actually, to get it to look really nice. Yeah, it's less cost, but like from an ingredient perspective, what is it, like $2, right? It's like $2 less of buttercream, or maybe it's $5, but it's the extra time. So at least for when I do naked wedding cakes, like it's in and out of the fridge 3 times before that tier is completely done. Because I frost it, put it in the fridge, take it out, smooth it out, fill in any holes, put it back in the fridge, bring it out again, smooth it again. And so I'm going back and forth to make sure that looks pristine and exactly how I want it. Oh, right here. Yeah.
So, do you, like, does the person commit for a cake and then pay half of the amount and then half at the point of
Yeah. So how I do it is I do, depending on the cake, but I'll usually do, when I was doing wedding cakes, I would do a $50 down payment. I would do a $50 down payment. If it was a bigger cake, I'd do a $100 down payment. But usually $50 down payment is what I would do. And then the remainder of the balance, do 2 weeks before the date that you're delivering. Don't try to collect it same day. Don't try to collect it after. Like 2 weeks before, I think, is a good rule. As I say, hey, $50 down payment, and then I'm gonna send you an invoice for the remaining balance, and it's due 2 weeks before your wedding. Everything's paid in full, everything's good. And then that's a benefit to you too, because then now you have that full amount in your bank account, then you can then use to purchase the ingredients for the cake. And then that it kind of helps with your whole pricing situation. You don't have to borrow money from other places too. I know some of you are going to another class, right? Any of the rest of you, or just the one? Okay, we have like 3 or 4 minutes left here, so.
I'm just curious, in all your years, what has been the most frustrating thing for you?
Oh.
When it comes to cakes? Like, what would be your number one?
Most frustrating. Oh my goodness. I might have to email you later about that one. Most frustrating. Honestly, I think, and it's not just because we just went through a pricing class, honestly, the most frustrating thing is that people just don't value what we do. And that really hurts. Like, I don't like that at all. And that's one reason I really want to push, like, trying to get this kind of information out there, because I really think that we, like, our time and what we do should be valued. And it's a valuable skill. It's something that it's a value we bring to the world that I think is not like very many other things. And I think that's probably the biggest frustration, is that people just don't understand, and I want them to so bad. And some people just don't, but you know. Yeah, see, there we go.
So this is around the pricing question, but around cake tastings, do
Yeah.
you charge extra or do you discount it from their price?
Okay, what I did for cake tastings, and I know there's a lot of different strategies out there. What I did is I charged for my cake tastings. I think I charged like $30 or something for my cake tasting. And what I did is if they booked with me, that went towards the cost of their cake. If they didn't book with me, then I have my costs covered, right? So figure out what that's gonna cost you to provide that material to them, but just make sure you're covered from your perspective so that then if they end up not booking with you and booking with somebody else, then you have yourself covered. But then that's also a good selling point for them too, from a marketing perspective, to say, hey, the tasting's $30, but if you end up booking with me, that then goes towards the total of your cake. And I think that's a good marketing and selling strategy as well, just to be like, because then they're like, oh, well, I've already spent $30 here, and the cake was really good. Oh, we'll just go with her, right?
Yeah. Was the 30 enough to like cover all of like the 5
So,
cakes and the frosting?
Probably not. If you're like at that point, it was because I was doing enough tastings that I would have like 2 or 3 tastings a week, and I could bake like all these little 4-inch cakes, and then I could cut them all up and I could utilize them for all the different tastings. So in that case, 30 was enough to cover everything. But if you're just doing a one-off tasting, you may need to up it a little bit. Maybe it's $50 for a tasting, but in the front, make sure you communicate that piece of, hey, it's $50, but you're meeting with them for a whole hour or 30 minutes or whatever it may be. And then if they end up booking with you, they can then get that applied to their total. I think that's a good strategy to do.
Something that help is maybe on your website, wherever you are, say to customers, I do tastings every first Saturday, or like this is the day. And if you want to schedule something outside of that, there's a little bit of an extra fee to like rearrange.
Yeah, and try to do your tastings back to back. Like if you have, like you're like, okay, Thursday nights are my night to do cake tastings, and I'm gonna do one from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and 7 to 8. And every week, that's what I'm gonna do. And then you can prep that right amount for those cakes, and then you can just push everybody to book on that one date too. Oh, the other at least tip too, like with tastings, at least that worked really well for me. I don't usually do like a full-on like flavor combination all stacked and everything. How I do it, and you can do it however you want, but I felt like this worked really well. I would have people pick 4 different cakes, or I would just kind of keep 4 basic ones and just say, I do vanilla, almond, chocolate, and red velvet. That's what I sample. And I then have them pick 4 or maybe 5 different buttercream flavors. And then I have my cake, my buttercream, and then they get the opportunity to then customize and pick and choose how they want to combine things together. So that's one thing that's worked really well for me, because my question that I had in the beginning when I did cakes is like, oh, well, I want to know what it tastes like with this. And so then you kind of give them a fun experience too, where it's like, oh, now, like, oh, I can try the red velvet cake, but then I can try it with chocolate buttercream, with caramel buttercream, with a little bit of raspberry preserves, a little bit of peach, and they can like play with it a little bit. And I've had some people come up with some really interesting, fun flavor combinations that way. And it's a little bit less work on your end, because then you don't have to frost a cake, right? You just have to slice a cake, pipe your buttercream into little cups, and you're good to go. Okay, any final questions? We're kind of at time, but no? Okay, awesome.